Welcome to another Rugby League Down South podcast for you. Another in our bite-sized editions of the new series. Our first two, one from the former Broncos captain Tony Clubb and the RFL's Ralph Rimmer. Check those out if you haven't heard them. Another few coming your way in the next few days and weeks as well. Now, today we hear from the former London Broncos head of youth performance, Phil Jones. He's left the club after a 15-year association to join Warrington in a similar role. You may have seen the BBC website story that I did with him. He developed Londoners into Super League regulars like Kieran Dixon, Wigan's Tony Clubb, as we just mentioned, and St Helens, Louis McCarthy, Scarisbrook, to name just a few. From Twitter, I had a few comments when I posted the news. One from Chad Randall of former London Broncos fame, saying, "What an absolute legend. He's done so much for the game as Jonesy and for the development of young London Rugby League players. Hashtag great man." Also Luke Dawn, former Bronco, saying it could be the biggest loss that London has had. Huge gap to fill. Great man from Luke Dawn. Anne saying she agreed with Dawny. Only one man who's been more influential, she said, than Phil Jones, and that would be David Hughes. Matt on Twitter at Ian Ramsdale asked if Phil Jones leaving was the biggest loss to London Rugby League so far. Hamish saying this is very concerning. So let's hear from him, shall we, before we hear from a few of your comments. This is the former head of youth performance at London Broncos, Phil Jones, and my chat with him from a week ago. Why is it that you're now leaving Broncos and heading on?
Yes, yeah. It's been 15 and a half seasons, and obviously a massive wrench to move to something new. And I think there's a number of reasons there. Somewhere, the club is still sorting its future out at the moment, and there's another opportunity arose. And I suppose that they're the key ones really that's happened.
Did you really want to leave the Broncos? Because I know, like you say, you spent 15 years there. Things seem to be going really well. It did look like, at academy level, especially the year that on field that the lads have just had. Things are turning out to be really competitive.
No, I think hand on heart, you'd like to see this job through to the end. Not that I'm sure where the end is, because I think every year you set yourself new challenges, and however well you achieve one year, clearly it was a successful year with the academy last year and lots of other things, but then you set the bar to the next level, and you set the bar to the next level. I think working within sports, and working in most areas, that there is no kind of, that's it, we've achieved it. So
did you think there was obviously still more to do?
Oh, there's massively more to do in London. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I always just describe to various people as though you're surfing and you're just trying to catch that big wave. And I think we're still climbing to try and catch that big wave that will see even more players challenging to become Super League players. And possibly, I always envisaged in the future that there would be a surplus of players, that there would be that many fantastic players that London Rugby League and the Super League and the other levels within London wouldn't be able to accommodate them, and the rest of the game would also be getting benefit of some of the fantastic young players that are in London.
I mean, the potential really is that, isn't it? The population-wise, if the game was to catch that wave in London, there would be no way that London itself could deal with it, and it would be beneficial for the wider game, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the figures. You can pick out most of the boroughs in London have got bigger populations than any of the cities that play the game in the north of England. And at the moment, obviously, we're really scratching the surface with how many children are involved in each area. Although it's really impressive, the numbers overall. If you went in an individual area, we're only dealing with handfuls of people at the moment. And alongside that is obviously there is due to the cosmopolitan nature of London, there is just such a massive mix of different races, of different ethnic backgrounds. I know we've talked about Rochdale, with the biggest Fijian population somewhere in London. There'll be lots of people from Eastern Europe who I believe are naturally made for Rugby League. There's so many different races there and different ethnic backgrounds. This is where Greg Inglis is going to be somewhere.
For years now, people have said, things are starting to happening in London. They're producing the talent. There's more people playing the game. In recent years, you've been there, you've seen it. Where is the game at that? I guess the level you've seen is the bridge, isn't it? It's people dragging people from the community and getting them into a professional sports outfit. Where is the sport at that level in London?
Well, I think we've had potential opportunities previously, but not with the solid base below them. That we certainly had athletes previously like Yusuf Sozi and Michael Forbes and Oliver Wanafu, but really they'd only come to the game really, really late, and there wasn't actually that much community activity out there. That they basically their first games virtually playing with the league was playing at a very high level. What you've got nowadays is the number of junior clubs out there. We've never had this many junior clubs existing that were interested in getting players playing, and also have a breadth of age groups. Quite often when I first got involved, something like that, it was probably just one age group really that they just kept. They worked really hard with, but nobody really had kind of under 7s through to under 18s at the same organisation.
You're a very modest man whenever I talk to you, Phil, and I'm sure that you won't say, in such cold hard facts that you not being at Broncos, will halt the production line and the process as such. But just tell me your hopes and fears for London Broncos, because it is a bit of an unstable time at the moment, and there really needs to be that consistency, doesn't there, to bring these kids through and to keep them going. Otherwise, it really is going to set the club back and set the sport back a long way in London.
Yeah, I think for lads need that's somewhere at the top to really aim for, and that certainly drove people like Clubby and like Louis McCarthy and lads who got on the team, like Jamie O'Callaghan's and Mike McMeekin. They've all been driven because they wanted to become professional athletes playing at the highest level they could possibly play at. And whilst avenues may, if London Broncos doesn't continue, whilst players may look and say, well, there's still avenues to go to the north of England, that's a hard concept initially to deal with when you're 12 and 13 and 14 years old getting into the sport. It's much easier to buy into, I want to be playing for my local team. And I think that's really, really important that they've got that somewhere at the top of the pyramid that they can aspire to be that initial goal of what they want to achieve.
And the cold hard fact about professional sport is that it's very competitive, and only the best, only the cream of the crop, only the smallest percentage actually make it all the way through. And I guess if you take that final top bit of the pyramid away from London, it makes it even more difficult, i.e. will turn people away.
It may turn certainly some will turn away. Those who probably continue will be even more driven and will have probably even higher dreams, but it's certainly a great carrot to have out there, and probably every player at 12 and 13 has an aspiration to start off with, and then over time, sometimes those aspirations change. We've got some fantastic people who either not been in the program or got in the program, not got all the way through, or gone on and they're coaching at their own club, or they are continuing to play as an amateur player, and they're pushing and promoting the game. So, there's lots of success stories, or going to university and playing. So there's lots of success stories out there that are not about playing, within the Super League. But I think that initial carrot is really important.
This is probably an entirely unfair question to ask you, but who is the best player that you've developed and has gone on to play Super League?
I think that really is an unfair question, and one that I can pick out groups of players, and there's lots of players I've enjoyed working with. Some very, very directly when I physically coach the academy team. Some that I've seen come all the way through the system. And there's lots of exciting players that you can pick out, and I think Dan Stevenson always stood out coming through the age groups. If it was first talked of and playing at Hemel, and you see him play, and you go, yeah, we can see what's here. And he was always a very enthusiastic trainer. But the same. Whilst you needed a new set of ears, after being around him, Louis McCarthy was a different sort of pitch that he probably initially when he came in found it pretty tough. He looked really good at a community level, came in, found it really tough. But then he knew what he wanted to do, knuckled down, and really got on with it. So there's lots of exciting people who've been within the system.
How much pride do you get, or how much pride have you had with your time at London Broncos? Because, as people have mentioned, the coaching job at the Super League side is arguably, the toughest coaching job in the league. You've got it tough because you haven't really got that profile as well. It's an emerging sport, a developing sport in a capital, and you're looking at the level below the level that most people look at. How much pride do you get at bringing these players through and, looking back and thinking, I've been part of their journey and making their dreams come true, I guess?
Oh, you certainly do get a fantastic amount of pride. And it's certainly one of the drives within it. Not that you go shouting it from the rooftops, but certainly, there's a great satisfaction when you see some of the lads on television. When you hear that somebody's, gone to university based because they enjoy rugby league and that's what drove them there. And some of the lads have gone back out coaching within their clubs and doing a variety of things. Yeah, there's a lot of pride within that. I also think, whilst we say, whilst people can point it's the hardest job out there, there's also some, great rewards from doing it, and there's opportunities to perhaps do things differently, because there's not lots of people saying, "Oh, well, we don't do it like this here," and so I think it's a fantastic, it has been a fantastic job.
And just tell us where you're going and what you're doing.
Well, I'm going to join Warrington Wolves. I'm actually taking the role as a player performance manager, so just the role below the one I've got at the moment. We're working very similar sorts of areas, with the scholarship and with the academy and looking at coaching systems, and I think, it'll all become much clearer once I get my teeth into, starting there.
And how will you look back on your time at Broncos? You've been there a long time. When you look back, it can't have been easy, but will you enjoy it fondly? Will you look back with good memories?
Oh, yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I've had some great times here, whether it was sat with a load of juniors watching us win the Cup semi-final against Castleford, whether it's some of the academy victories we've had over the years, whether it's, going along and just being blown away by the standard at some of the community clubs, and going to London Origin and seeing the fantastic displays on the show. Alongside that is obviously some of the great people that I've worked with, both within the club and within the wider rugby league community in London. So yeah, there'll be a lot of pleasure I'll take from it, and it'll certainly be something I'll always look back and say, that was fantastic to be involved in, and certainly has shaped me as a person, and also, what I could possibly do in the future. I'm not sure I'd have had these opportunities initially if I'd started working the game elsewhere.
And you mentioned a few big stories there. Is there a headline event, a headline story from your time at Broncos that sticks in your mind as, one of the highlights or the highlight?
I think it's hard, and I think there's club highlights. I think that semi-final away at against Castleford at Leeds was pretty big, because it was in the balance, and it was a great game. It swung one way and the other. From a personal point of view, we played Wakefield in a kind of a playoff for the academy, where they used to be split into two stands, and we were in the second division of Wakefield, and we just played fantastically that day. And I remember half-time Wakefield, I could hear their coach giving them around to the kitchen about they shouldn't be, that London should be nowhere near them and things like that, and we just let the lads listen, and they went out and absolutely blew Wakefield away second half. Named Michael Warrency just pushing somebody off and going length of the field. And then, even going last year, it was a fantastic moment winning away at Wigan with the academy. And it's not necessarily just about winning, but it was just the pride in the performance and the determination that they were going to find a way to win that game.
And what's your hopes for London Broncos? It is a nervy time at the moment. It's an unstable time as well. I guess you're going to hope that they get themselves sorted and things can continue and to keep the production line going.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. I bear the club all the goodwill it can get. I want them to succeed. I want them to continue. I do believe that it will make a massive difference for the game in this country if London is successful, and certainly successful by producing more and more players. And that's what I want to see, and I won't be a stranger to it. I'm sure I'll be back down on regular currency, even if it's just coming down with Warrington's teams. But there'll be a place in my heart always with London.
So we wish Phil Jones all the best in his new role with Warrington. A massive loss really for London Rugby League, and it's a shame that things have got, I guess, so bad at Broncos that he really had no other option but to take another role which guaranteed him a future. With the uncertainty over Broncos at the moment, a really big loss. And James Massara is still continuing at the moment to run the academy in some capacity, although again it's uncertain to really guess what will happen with the academy in the future. One thing that absolutely has to stay and has to remain in some way, shape or form, whatever happens with the Broncos in the future. A few more of your comments. Andy saying, best wishes, Jonesy, from all at Spitfires RL down at the Southampton Spitfires, of course, Andy. He's saying, you'll always be welcome at our club. Eddie saying, you took me for my level 1 a few years back. You were a massive impact to us southern softies in the community, so good luck, Jonesy. Fifth Tackle on Twitter at Ian Ramsdale saying, losing Phil Jones is a massive loss for London RL and for Broncos. Thank you and all the best for the future. And Ian saying, without you we would not have the youngsters interested in rugby league, and our loss is definitely Warrington's gain. So all the best, Jonesy. And I had a few questions as well asking about the future of the London Broncos. I'll just read you a few of my tweets from a couple of days ago from a little bit of digging that I did. Broncos, they still hope to secure a deal for 2014. Info is very difficult to pin down. They are continuing in talks with Barnett. I guess the process may have been slowed by the uncertainty over the Super League future, although I think the steer that I've been sort of hearing in the last few days is that really that's not massively part of the process. It's more about getting Broncos sorted. I understand, as planned, they will be on the fixture list for a 14-team Super League when they're announced on the 18th of November. That's when the Super League fixtures come out, the 18th of November. The following weeks you get Championship and then Championship 1. And a few people have said, why haven't Broncos just been kicked out of Super League right now? I think the bottom line is they haven't contravened any rules yet. I don't believe there is any deadline or anything that they've missed, and I don't think there's any extra deadlines other than the usual ones which you'd usually have at the start of a season, so naming your squad and etc. So they're not in pre-season yet and they don't have a date for pre-season, and I was told that there were 6 players that Broncos were being retained, or Broncos were retaining even. Here's some names for you, 5 of them: Dixon, Lovell, Krasniki, Delapi and McMeekin. Haven't been able to confirm the 6th of the 5, and there are strong rumours that Kieran Dixon is being linked with a move to Salford. That's what's been in the news. So it could well be that there's only at the moment 4 players, although I was told 6. I just couldn't figure out who the 6th one was, and as far as I'm aware they are the only 6. There is one more. Number 6 has cropped up. I can't confirm who that 6th one is, I just don't know. But it is only 6. The rest have been released. So any things that you've seen on message boards etc. that mention other players, then as far as I can tell, they're untrue and false. It is just those 5-6 players. Tony had asked, is there still no news on Broncos' future on Twitter, at Ian Ramsdale. Sarah saying, after the tweets that I'd put out, I remember when it was Fulham. Pity it wasn't built on from the good times that they had. Andrew saying, last time I looked, Rugby League team needed a game day squad of 17. What on earth is going on? Tim saying, at Ian Ramsdale, surely if they cannot field a squad, then they should lose their franchise. I think, Tim, as we just explained, it's a bit too if they can't field a squad, of course, by the start of the season, then maybe they would invalidate their franchise. But at the moment, I don't believe they've contravened any rules as we stand. Brad, who writes for the Sydney Morning Herald, saying, wow, so disappointing. Remember when Branson owned the club, future was so secure then. Mark saying they need to rebuild again in a lower tier. That's a conversation, a discussion that would be interesting to have, and I do plan to still continue with a podcast and have a discussion programme with everyone. Well, not everyone, not all the fans, but with a couple of fans together once the future is decided, whichever way it goes. Mark saying as well on Twitter, at Ian Ramsdale, I'm a huge fan of the London project, but how on earth has this situation been allowed to drag on? Disaster looms, said Mark. And Yorkshire Red Devils on Twitter saying, regardless of people's thoughts on London, it doesn't benefit the competition to have a non-competitive team making up the numbers. Well, I did actually venture down to Barnet FC, who have been strongly linked and have been in conversations with the Broncos. I will give you that audio in the next few days. Just have to decide whether the editors at BBC London want to do anything with the audio that I've got. And once that's been decided, I can publish the audio as a podcast here. So stay tuned. That'll be in the next day or two. I'll bring that to you. But thank you very much for listening once again to this Rugby League Down South. Of course, we heard from Phil Jones earlier. I'll be back with another one very soon.